Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for hosting this today. I think it's been very beneficial so far to have this discussion. And Ben, I have to tell you that I agree with Matt. You've been wonderful. It's been a pleasure to work with you over these last few months, and your staff has been very responsive and has helped my constituents tremendously. So I know a lot of this is out of your control, but where your staff has been able to help and resolve issues, you have, and so I very much appreciate that. Just to follow up on, I guess, Mr. Skoufis had mentioned some type of time frames in terms of having an adjuster come out, what you thought was be a reasonable time frame. What do you believe is a reasonable time frame for an insurance carrier to make a determination on a claim? Considering the circumstances of the magnitude of what we were dealing with during an emergency response.
Right. I think if we're talking about private insurance, homeowners insurance post-Sandy, where they're not dealing with the flood claims, which were often the difficult ones, I think for your typical average claim, the reg says 15 days, but they can have extensions if there are reasons. I think that is where it should be, 15 days, to finalize that claim once you get the adjuster's report. Of course, advance payments can flow much earlier than that. So it's not like the homeowner is getting no money initially. Once the adjuster gives the report, often an advance should flow from the insurance company to the homeowner. Now, that again raises the bank issue, which is initially those advance payments got stuck at the banks. But it could, some of the money should flow right then, and then the rest of the money, I think for the average claim, I think the reg is in a good place for about 15 days with, under the right circumstances, the ability to get an extension.
So 15 days for the determination and payment, or just the determination?
The adjuster's report gets done first, and then from the adjuster's report, the insurance company should make that payment. The money should flow in 15 days.
Okay. Okay. And you believe for the time that it takes for an adjuster to come out during a state-declared emergency should be approximately, do you believe it should be 6 days, as it has been, I guess, said by the governor?
Yeah, so we had a very long discussion, and I remember it, with the governor, sitting around the table with a number of executives from insurance companies, and the governor was pushing very hard, what is the right number? And I think the governor felt very comfortable after that, that 6 business days, which ends up being a little more than a week because you have the weekend in any 6-day period, which is really 8 regular days, was sufficient to get an adjuster there in an emergency.
There were many cases that I came across with constituents where the adjusters didn't come out 6 days, they didn't come out 15 days, they didn't really even come out 30 days in some cases. How do we deal with that? I mean, if we're saying, look, it's got to be 6 days,
right,
and they're not complying.
I think what happened initially, and this is why the governor realized very quickly the adjusters were not responding quickly, and under the old reg they had 15 days, and they weren't getting there even in that time, and that's why the governor took the action and said, make it 6 days, we're going to post your reports online, and we're also going to investigate you if you don't hit the 6 days. And that's why just recently we've now got certain insurance companies under investigation for not hitting those dates as they're supposed to. And I think, and it goes back to the question about deterrence and consequences, but there need to be real consequences if a company is not hitting those dates and has no excuse for not hitting those dates. And it's really up to the department to enforce those dates.
Yeah, I agree that there should be additional penalties attached. I received all sorts of complaints. There was, the homeowner insurance saying it's flood saying it's homeowners. Checks were received, $500 checks came in the mail, but they didn't say what it was there to cover. There was no denials, but no clarification under where in the policy they're being denied. There were sewer backups. Homeowners would say, well, you got flooded anyway, so it should be covered. It would, we're not going to cover you because you had a flood in addition to that, which would have ruined everything regardless. What are the 3,000 plus complaints that you received? What do you think? I know you said they were progressing over the time period, but do you have an idea of what the top 3 complaints were?
I guess I would characterize it this way. The top complaint is really generally about speed and response time. And I think that, again, it evolved, but initially it was adjusters aren't getting there fast enough, but later it was we're not getting the final report from the adjuster fast enough, and then ultimately we're not getting paid. I'd say one of the other big complaints was about the banks sitting on the money. And then we've had a lot of complaints about the anti-concurrent clauses, the sewer backup kind of situation you're talking about. So those have been three of the biggest, but they're all over the map, and we try to deal with them one at a time, case by case. But that is a laborious process. And one thing we try to also look at is we try to categorize the complaints and then ask ourselves, are there regulatory actions we can take that will systematically deal with that problem? And I know it's the same kind of process the legislature ultimately undertakes as it considers what to legislate about.
And the 13% that have gone unresolved, I assume those are the most egregious. I mean, what exactly do you believe is the holdup with those 13%? It
varies, and remember that is the 13% unresolved is for the whole pool when you don't break it down. And so, for example, when you do break it down, there are a lot of big commercial property claims that have yet to be decided. So, for example, $304 million has been paid out on commercial property. That's 73% of the claims. But the industry, based on its predictions, expects to pay $934 million out. So that's a big chunk of change still that is being worked on, and that is often because commercial claims tend to be more complex and involve the modeling of losses and complicated questions of mitigation and causation. So that's one of the reasons. And I think the same could be said for business interruption claims. The remaining, if you look just at residential, it's really just our remaining 6%. And those, I think, are going to be the most complex, most heavily litigated, potentially, claims. And they will be, I think, tough to resolve. But we're going to try to do whatever we can to help that process along.
As you mentioned, the state really only oversees the homeowners and not flood insurance, non-flood insurance.
Right.
What percentage would you say of the calls that you've gotten are flood related and that we just couldn't assist the customers? Is that included in any of these numbers in the 3,000 calls? And
yeah, I don't have the number at hand, but a lot. We get a lot of flood insurance complaints. It's natural. We also get a lot of complaints where people call in and say they think they're unhappy with their homeowner's insurance, but when they send the policy to us and we take a look at it, it's very clear their damage was flood, and their flood insurance is what they're unhappy with. In those circumstances, we don't just hang up the phone and say we don't regulate that. Sorry. First of all, most flood insurance gets done through what's called the Write Your Own policy. So the ultimate underwriter is the federal government through the NFIP, but it's administered by a private carrier. Travelers, for example, has a large block of this business, and we regulate those carriers. So while we can't tell the carriers what to do exactly with respect to flood claims, because we are their regulator generally, we have, shall we say, influence with them and can call them and say, this person has a flood insurance problem, you haven't sent an adjuster, get someone there now. And we've worked hard with FEMA to get FEMA comfortable with our role in pushing the carriers in their program. And after Irene, it was more of a problem with FEMA, and since then we've worked that out with FEMA, and they're pretty comfortable with us being involved in those kinds of cases as well.
yeah, that kind of reflects what my office has experienced. Actually, the majority, I've received more complaints about flood than all the other insurance type of insurance combined. Is there anything that you think that you would recommend based on your expertise that we can do as a state, even though it's flood and it's FEMA and it's federal, anything that we can do to improve it in the future?
We should, I think, do whatever we can to encourage people to get flood insurance, those who don't. I mean, the fact that 50% of the people that were hit by Sandy didn't have, approximately 50% didn't have flood insurance is a very telling number. I mean, the flip side of this is very difficult, which is flood insurance premiums are going to be going up now. The re-up of the flood insurance program federally this past year has really limited the subsidy for flood insurance, and the rates are going to reflect much more closely sort of what an actuary would say you should be paying. And so people who are really harmed are going to get this double whammy and have to pay a lot more for flood insurance. And so that's the problematic flip side. We want to encourage people to have flood insurance, but the question is, can they afford it?
It's a tough sell to encourage someone, especially after the experience that they've had, to buy flood insurance. And I fear that, because I think people in the future will not be covered and then will not qualify for FEMA funds if something were to happen again. But if they're not being covered this time and they're getting the runaround and getting a $500 check in the mail when they have $10,000 worth of damage, I think it's going to be hard to encourage them. They're going to say, what's the use of me buying this if I'm not getting anything all these years that I've been paying into it? So I think that's an ongoing battle that we're going to have as a whole.
Yeah.
I think for the interest of time, I know my good friend Phil Goldfeder has some follow-up questions, so I will conclude at that. But I thank you very much for everything and all your efforts.
Thank you.